Hi, my name is John Burnberry. I'm on the board of the Bay Area Independent Publishers Association, and I'm going to be interviewing Steven Kessler, psychotherapist today, and author of the 5 Personality Patterns. And I'm going to ask Steven to, can you introduce yourself and your book?
Sure, John. So I'm a local psychotherapist here in the San Francisco area. And before that, I was an actor in New England. And I've been really interested in people my whole life and trying to figure out what makes people tick. And this book is, in a way, the fruit of that process. I had been studying people my whole life, first as an actor and then as a psychotherapist, and studying maps of personality. Some of the popular ones are the MBTI and the Enneagram. Had never felt quite satisfied with those, although I was a great fan of the Enneagram for 20 years. And then about 20 years ago, I was introduced to this map called character structure, which had kind of been hiding in the backwaters of psychology and of energy healing for decades and decades. And the writing on it was difficult to understand and things like that. But as I studied it, I realized this seems more useful, more true to life, simpler, more accurate than anything else I'd ever seen. But there was nothing for the general public or even really for therapists that explained it. So I thought, well, okay, maybe it's up to me to bring that out. So that's how I came to write this book.
So what's important about this book? What's the most important takeaway? Or
Well, one of the simple things that most of us don't realize is we all live on the assumption that we are free and we are consciously determining our own lives, when in fact we're actually the prisoners of patterns that we developed as a child, personality patterns, and those patterns are making most of the big decisions in our lives. And the way to get free of that is first to understand what those patterns are, and then to discover which patterns we get caught in and how to get ourselves out of pattern and back to being present.
so you say we're prisoners of these patterns. That sounds sort of extreme, to be a prisoner. How can you explain more about this being imprisoned by the patterns we've developed?
The patterns are actually self-reinforcing, and they distort our sense perceptions of the world, and then our beliefs, which are part of the patterns, distort what we think is important to know and to pay attention to. And by the time all of that has its effect on us, we are experiencing the world through a filter that we don't even know is there. So we're not experiencing the world accurately. We're not experiencing the whole world. What we're experiencing is a slice of the world, and it's a specific slice that reinforces the beliefs of the pattern we're stuck in. So we think we are experiencing the world accurately and that everyone is experiencing the same world we are. But in fact, we're experiencing a distorted slice of the world, and other people might be experiencing a different distorted slice. And that's one of the explanations of how it can be that 2 or 3 or 4 people will experience the same situation and then come to such completely different conclusions about it, and even swear that different things happened.
Can you give an example that you've come across in your life or your practice of how we are seeing things inaccurately and how that manifests?
I mean, this happens in many, many different ways. It's most obvious. I mean, I'm a marriage and family therapist. So I often work with couples, and in couples,
Oh
this
yeah.
is often the source of that fight that they've been having for 10 or 20 years, and they don't really know what it's about, and they can't really figure out how it started or why it goes on, but it continues, and they can never figure out how to stop it. And often the fight really originates in the fact that they are viewing the same experience, or rather experiencing the same situation completely differently. So let me give you a really simplified version of that. We've all listened to songs on the radio, or records or stuff, and we know that there's both a melody and words, and that the melody and the words are both part of the song. If you imagine that some people are only listening to the melody and they don't really hear the words, I mean, they know the words are there, they wouldn't deny that, but the words aren't important. So it's the melody, it's the music that really moves them, and that's when they say, did you hear that song? They're talking about the melody, and they didn't really hear the words. Now say they're married to somebody who really hears only the words and doesn't really notice the melody. They're listening to the same song and they're hearing it completely differently. So I've used the example of, a recorded song you hear on the radio, but let's say we come down to a conversation or a fight between this, say, husband and wife. And let's say the husband is the one who's focused on words and the wife is focused on melody. And they're having this argument, and she says, well, do you love me? And he says, of course I love you. God damn it, I told you I love you, right? He hears the words, and the words are, of course I love you. I told you I love you.
She hears the tone.
She hears the tone, the melody, and the melody says, I'm angry. It doesn't say I love you.
Yeah.
She has a completely different experience. Now, that's melody and words. That's not exactly these 5 personality patterns. They would be a little bit more complicated, but that's a simple example that everybody can relate to.
Well, let me use that example. Let's say that is a recurring pattern.
Yeah.
How would you, as a marriage and family counselor, try to make that better?
Well, I would help each of them realize that they are focusing on a portion of the experience, but not the whole experience, and that their sweetheart is focusing on a different portion and therefore having a completely different experience of that same situation. So by seeing that, they could begin to have some empathy for the way the other person gets it. For instance, if I could explain to the man in this instance, well, I heard you say the words, of course I love you. Did you notice that you were saying it in an angry way? He can probably say,
no, I'm not angry.
I'm not angry. Okay, so I'm angry. I can say, okay, now just imagine for a moment, if you didn't understand the words and all you could hear was the tone, would you think that that said, I love you? Right? He can probably get there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Similarly, with the wife, we go through the opposite kind of discovery process of, are you aware that he doesn't actually hear the melody the same way you do? What he hears is the words. And that's why if your words get confused, which is probably also part of this, people who don't focus on the words don't pay so much attention to the words. So they're busy with the story and the melody of it, and then the words get tumbled up and jumbled up.
And the other person takes it literally, the specific word.
The words don't grammatically even make sense.
Yeah.
So someone who's insisting on grammar, they get stuck right there and they go, but I couldn't even understand what you said.
Yeah, yeah. So your book goes through these 5 personality patterns. Do you want to sort
Yep,
of give me an overview of those patterns?
sure. So the fundamental thing to notice about these patterns is each one arises out of repeatedly, habitually using a particular safety strategy. There are only 5 safety strategies that a person can use if you really boil it down to energetically, what can you do, especially when you're a young kid. And the 5 strategies are, and this is for a time when you're feeling overwhelmed, you're in distress, like something is happening and it doesn't feel good and you don't like it.
So
Okay,
you're being attacked or hurt in some way.
sure. Okay, or scared or jealous or angry or distressed in some way.
Distressed.
So, one thing you can do is leave.
Leave.
You can um, you can either physically, turn and get out of the room. But if you're a 1-year-old baby in the crib, you can't really do that. What you can do is take your attention away. You can leave your body.
Check
You
out.
can dissociate. You can get out. So that's the first one. You can leave. The second safety strategy a person can use is to try to connect with the other person and get them to help. Like, you fix it for me, I'm in trouble, I'm in distress. And this is what we all do naturally as little babies when we cry, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Our crying is a signal of like, I'm not happy, you fix it.
Right. Right.
Okay? So leaving, connect, and appeal for help. Third one is you can pull your energy in and send it down in your body and try to hunker down and hide.
So
Try to
how's that
just,
different? How's that different than the first one? The
it's
leave.
different in that you're not actually leaving your body or leaving the situation so much. In the first one, you might not just leave your body, you might leave the physical time and space plane entirely, go some other dimension, which is a little hard for most of us to understand if we don't go to other dimensions. But it's easy for the people who do. They get to be really good at psychic, energetic stuff. With the third one, it's more a hunkering down and hiding in place. So you're trying to weather the storm. You're trying to get as small and as protected as possible. It's sort of like if you imagine you have a manhole cover that you can pull down, or a trapdoor or something. So
Like you're enduring.
you're enduring it, exactly. And that's the term that I used for that pattern. So you got to stay there. You can't get away, but you're going to endure it. And that, to do that, you bring the energy down in your body, you send it down into the ground, and you kind of stop all action. So you're not expressing yourself, you're not taking action, you're just clenched in and hiding.
Clenched. That's good.
The fourth one is the opposite of that. Instead of bringing the energy in and down, you bring it up and send it out. You're trying to get as big as possible, as intimidating and big and strong and powerful as possible, so that you can control other people, so you can intimidate them into doing whatever you need so you'll feel safer.
Sort of like what an animal would do, like, you know.
Yeah, yeah. When animals do that kind of threat display,
Mm-hmm.
they show their claws or fangs or growl or whatever, that's the same idea. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm big, don't mess with me.
Right.
So so this is, you get big, and if pushed, you fight.
Right.
And the fifth one is you contract your energy sort of sideways to try to narrow the flow of energy through your body so you don't feel so much inside. And instead, you put your attention on the outside and on your performance. You try to be a good boy or a good girl.
So that's more like squashing your feelings and just doing whatever you need to do to, yeah.
It's it's squashing your feelings, and it's also your attention shifts from your personal experience to the rules and regulations and the correct forms, the right way of doing it. So you get very focused on correct versus incorrect,
Hmm.
and on doing it the right way, and pleasing mom and dad, and passing the test, and getting good grades, and standing up straight, and brushing your teeth, and combing your hair, and all that stuff, right? You perform really well, but you're not paying much attention to what's really going on inside you.
Right, right. Well, one of the things I like about the approach that you mentioned is you say it's not really um, about who you are, like the
Hmm.
Enneagram, or as much as what you do to feel safer. And because
Exactly.
sometimes that I've gone through those personality tests, and they're trying to label you, and I feel a little bit like, well, yeah, I'm over in this corner, but being defined as a particular way, as opposed to, because we all act different ways. Sometimes we may
Hmm.
not feel brave, but we act bravely.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the question I have. So we all try to keep ourselves safe in different ways, and you also are saying that we don't necessarily perceive reality accurately.
Hmm.
So how do we? Okay, I'm aware that I can be unfocused, undisciplined, scattered, but my way of feeling safe is I tell myself, okay, well, I make my deadlines, I do good work, I'm reliable. How do I know if I'm being too easy on myself? Am I keeping myself safe by being too easy on myself? Just it's like we might know we're not accurately seeing the world, but we still need to have some semblance of a picture we agree on within ourselves to decide what to do. Does that make sense as a question?
Right. We all have to have some way to decide what to do.
Yeah,
Um, Before jumping into that, I want to go back to the
sure.
beginning of your statement. I agree. Most personality maps, or most maps of personality, are typologies,
Yeah.
and they will assign you to a type and say you are this type,
Hmm.
and you are this type from birth to death, end of story. And this is completely different. It is not who you are, it is what you do. It's what you do automatically and compulsively in distress.
Hmm. Hmm.
And it's not just one thing that you do. Typically, a person does two, sometimes three of these different safety strategies, and often in succession. When they first get distressed, they'll go into their first pattern, their primary pattern. And if that handles it, okay. If the distress goes up beyond some threshold, they'll switch to their backup pattern. But in either case, it is what we automatically do to try to feel safer. It's not who we are.
Right.
Who we are is our presence, our essence. And that's really important to keep in mind, because that's what we want to always come back to.
Well, is there, you've got these five different ways. Uh, and I know you don't probably want to say, well, one of them is better than another, but
As far as I can tell, they're not. They're all,
right. But I
they're
mean,
all
but
deviations from
let's,
being your real self.
well, let's say we want to be our best self.
Yeah.
Uh, and we also want to be safe, or
Yeah.
maybe that's the problem. Maybe the problem is that we're trying to be safe, and we need to not let that drive our decisions. But I guess I'm just saying, how is there an approach that you as a psychotherapist recommend when we don't feel safe?
Well, sure. All of these safety strategies were adopted in the past
Hmm.
in response to particular difficulties in the past. And if we're doing them automatically and compulsively, and we go into our two strategies whenever we're upset, there's a pretty good chance that our strategies don't really fit for the current situation. So there's no guarantee that your strategy is a good choice. It's the old problem of, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem looks like a nail. if you're present, then your awareness is here in this time and place, and you can compose a response to whatever the difficulty is that fits this time and this situation, and probably handles it better than some automatic thing that you got when you were 3.
So it's not so much that any of these strategies are bad ideas as much as we use them unconsciously
And automatically, yeah.
And that the
Yeah.
point is that the more aware we are of these patterns, the more we can use what the situation demands as opposed to what we learn for most of our life.
Right. And each of these patterns actually brings with it a set of gifts, because in order to carry out any of these patterns, you have to be able to pull off certain skills.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be able to do certain things to make that pattern work. For instance, to bring energy up and look big and strong and intimidate everybody, you have to be able to bring up enough energy and look intimidating, or people are going to laugh at you.
Right.
Or the connecting thing, you have to be able to find the connection with people. So in doing any of these patterns, you are practicing that set of skills over and over and over again all day long for decades.
Right.
By the time you get to be an adult, you're really good at that particular set of skills. You may have a real deficit in another set of skills, but you're good at those.
Right. Well, so I'm a big believer in awareness and, knowing, being conscious of what we're doing. But if these things are habits, you can be aware of your bad habits and still not be able to break them. How do you, stop reacting in a particular way and do something that's more, it's got to be more than awareness. It's somehow practice too.
Well, it's more than a habit. A compulsion is more than a habit. A compulsion is a habit plus some big energy charge in the body that's driving it. And that charge comes from some trauma that is still stuck in your body. The trauma supplies the fuel that makes the habit irresistible, or makes the compulsion irresistible. So there are 2 things you can do to diminish the hold that your patterns have on you. One is clear out of your body the traumas that are fueling them. And the other is you can learn the energetic skills that you missed as you got stuck in those patterns. And probably you wouldn't have gotten taught them anyway, because our culture doesn't understand energetic skills. But you can learn the energetic skills you need to be more present.
So let's come back to the book. What would you say the most important thing or things that readers will learn from the 5 Personality Patterns book?
I think they'll learn how to regain control of their own life. Mm-hmm. How to identify where on this map they tend to get stuck, and what's good about that, what's not so good, and how to get unstuck and back to being present. Now, it still takes practice to come back to being present, and it takes clearing that trauma out of your body. But if a person is living in prison and doesn't even know they're in prison, they don't take any action to get out.
Right.
When you realize that you've been living in prison, you start to think, well, okay, how can I get out of here? And one of the things you notice is, well, wait a minute, the door isn't really locked.
What if it's a life sentence?
Well, it is a life sentence if you don't realize that you can get out.
Yeah. So where can we find out more about you and your book?
There's naturally a website, which of course is called exactly the same thing as the book.
Oh, 5personalitypatterns.
Go 5personalitypatterns.com. And 5 can be either the numeral or written out. It doesn't matter.
You got both. That's good. That's good.
I'm smart. I can do that.
Yes. Which strategy was that? Yeah.
I don't know. You know, not everything is a
I know.
personality pattern. Like,
So, one last question is, what do you do when you're not writing books or practicing psychotherapy?
I love singing. I love dancing.
Are you still
I've
doing
been
any
part
acting?
of a men's chanting group for decades.
Uh-huh.
And I love singing together. We're not able to sing together right now, of course, because
Have
of
you
the
done
whole-
any Zoom choruses? I've seen.
Yes, I have been teaching various courses. That falls more into the category of work. But yeah, I've been doing.
I actually said Zoom choruses.
Oh, Zoom
Because
courses.
people are doing.
We haven't figured out how to do it without the time lag on Zoom. We need to do that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know
We
how
need
that.
some techie person to explain that to us.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks very much. And I appreciate hearing about these patterns, and I got to figure out how I can be more conscious of those myself.
There's more information about that on the website.
Okay, thank you.
That'll help you out. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.